When I woke up after a night of drinking, there was someone beside me. The familiar profile was none other than Andres Spencer, the man I had secretly loved throughout college, who had rejected me for 4 straight years. I couldn't believe it. Back then, he lived a modest, almost impoverished life. And now, years after graduation, he still seemed no better off. Without hesitation, I left a check on the nightstand and walked away with a flourish, finally letting go of the obsession that had haunted me for so long. But just a few days later, he cornered me in a hotel hallway. "You slept with me and ran? What's that supposed to mean?" I looked at him, feigning sincerity. "I left money." He shoved the check back into my jacket. "And you think that's enough?" I raised my hands defensively. "How much do you want? If it's too much, I can't afford it." His gaze sharpened. "No money? Then take responsibility." The night before, at the dinner table, I single-handedly drank everyone under the table and ended up completely wasted. Mike, my assistant, somehow managed to drag me to a hotel and escape. Though not without considerable effort. I have a bad reputation when it comes to drinking, get enough alcohol in me, and am bound to embarrass myself. That's why I deliberately hired someone like Mike. A petite female assistant might not have been able to handle my antics. When I finally woke up the next morning, there was a man in my bed. The sunlight filtered through the gap in the curtains, spilling over his perfectly sculpted figure. The sharp line of his jaw stirred a sense of déjà vu, familiar, enticing, and unmistakably him. At least it wasn't my assistant. I thought with a sigh of relief. I leaned in closer, and my heart skipped a beat as I recognized that face. Cold, aloof, and entirely unforgettable, it was Andres Spencer, the very man I had spent 4 years chasing in college, only to come up empty-handed. To this day, I can still recall the night of our graduation party. Tears streaming down my face, I asked him, "Are you really not going to give me a chance?" I had chased Andres for 4 long years. No matter how I pleaded, threatened, or showered him with care and attention, he remained unmoved. He'd rather work 2 part-time jobs during his spare time, suffering under the blazing sun in a theme park costume or braving icy winds to deliver takeout, than accept my love or money. That night, knowing it was my last chance, I mustered the courage to ask, "How much would it take for you to spend the night with me? Name your price." Amid the murmurs of curious onlookers, he clenched his jaw and spat a single word at me, "Get lost." From that moment on, Andres became the unrequited love of my life. The obsession I couldn't let go. Never did I imagine that this years-long fixation would end in such a bizarre fashion. Nor did I expect that the man who once prided himself on his dignity and independence would still be so impoverished after graduation, ultimately bending to money and taking up this kind of work. I had thought he would at least land a decent job and carve out a promising future for himself. Being someone who insists on finishing what I start, I decided that last night would be the closure I needed for all those years of pining. Even though I blacked out and couldn't recall anything, I left a check as a token of our history before walking away. To say I wasn't upset would be a lie. The man I had once begged for love was now, who knows, probably entangled with countless wealthy women. If only he'd chosen to be with me back then, it would have saved him all this. Hopefully, he'll use that money to turn his life around and start fresh. My legs wobbled as I left the hotel, my head pounding from the hangover. Once home, I sulked in bed all day until Amy, my best friend, called that evening. "Come out. I've got a great guy to introduce to you." "Not interested," I groaned, still feeling unwell. Amy sounded shocked on the other end. "Victoria, have you gone celibate? Or did you sneak off and have a fling without telling me?" Unable to hold back, I told her about Andres. Her response was an ear-piercing scream through the phone. "You had a one-night stand with Andres? Wait, that's not even the point, he's doing that kind of work now?" I hung up, unwilling to listen to her noise any longer. Life goes on, I reminded myself. Andres had already become part of my past the day we graduated. Money is so much more reliable. Throwing myself into work, I aced 2 business trips and closed multiple deals. My confidence surged, and life was on the upswing. Then, on the day I returned to sign a major contract, Mike booked me into the Opal District Hotel, the very same one. Worse yet, it was the same room. It was late, and I didn't want to bother changing hotels. I simply asked Mike to find me a different room. I had no desire to spend another night surrounded by ghosts of my youth. Not even in memory. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. Thinking it was Mike, I opened the door without a second thought. Standing there was Andres, dressed head to toe in a sharp black suit, his presence casting a shadow that loomed over me. His expression was darker than the shadows themselves. So, there's a dress code for this line of work now? Not only that, but designer suits too? I stood frozen for 2 seconds, before slamming the door shut. Sorry, I don't need any special services. I called out through the door. I absolutely couldn't let myself fall for him again. Not a chance. The next second, a strong, slender hand gripped the edge of the door. No matter how much strength I mustered, I couldn't budge it an inch. Those hands, long, elegant, and utterly flawless, were the same ones I used to secretly photograph in the library, saving them in an album I would scroll through on countless lonely nights. Even now, so close, they still made my heart race uncontrollably. The door was forced open, and Andre stepped inside. He yanked at his tie in frustration, revealing a face so impeccably handsome it could make anyone's knees go weak. Only this time, his features were tinged with anger. Victoria. His voice was low and seething. You slept with me and ran? What's that supposed to mean? He remembered my name? Back in college, he barely spared me a glance. I retreated step by step, cornered by his imposing presence, and tried to explain with all the sincerity I could muster. I left money. His jaw tightened in fury as he pulled the check from his pocket and shoved it into my jacket. You think this is enough to pay me off? That was $50,000. What kind of service isn't worth $50,000? I stammered, how much do you want? If it's too much, I can't afford it. His response was to press me against the frosted glass door of the bathroom, his posture demanding an explanation. No money? Then take responsibility. I looked up at that painfully familiar face, utterly stunned. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? Back then, no matter how hard I tried, he wouldn't even spare me a second glance. Now, after one drunken night, when all my feelings for him had long faded, he showed up demanding that I take responsibility? I refused him outright. Could you have a little professionalism, please? We're square. You've been paid. Just leave, and if you feel shortchanged, I'll make up the difference. It was hard not to feel a pang of sadness as I said those words. He had been my first love, after all, someone I had pined for years. But this Andres wasn't the same man I had fallen for back then. Instead of leaving, he pinned me against the bathroom mirror, his tone laced with barely restrained frustration. Professionalism? Funny you should say that. Word is, you've been telling people I'm a male escort. What? I hadn't. Where was this nonsense coming from? Wait, I only mentioned it to Amy. Could it be her big mouth spreading rumors again? I quickly pulled out my phone and checked our college group chat. Sure enough, the conversation had spiraled into speculation about Andres doing questionable work. My heart sank. Amy, my supposed best friend, was nothing short of a traitor. No matter what someone's job was, gossiping about it in a public group was just wrong, especially when the subject was him. Realizing my mistake, I lowered my head and muttered an apology. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get out. If there's anything I can do to make it up to you, just tell me. Andres let out a cold laugh. I couldn't see his expression with my head bowed, and honestly, I didn't dare look. For some reason, despite being fierce and assertive with others, I always lost my nerve around him. Even after all these years, nothing had changed. The next moment, he scooped me up effortlessly and placed me on the bathroom counter. His forehead pressed against mine as he spoke in a low, husky voice. Fine. Compensate me. Wait. That's not what I meant by compensate. Last time, I had been so drunk that I remembered nothing. This time, I was completely sober, but his dangerously attractive face left me defenseless. Fine. I'll take the loss. I braced myself, fully expecting him to demand a hefty sum. After all, his skills in bed were certainly worth the price. The next morning, I woke to find the other side of the bed cold and empty. Andres was already gone. On the nightstand lay the card I had left for him last time, with a note pressed beneath it. A single string of numbers, his phone number. I thought back to what he had said about taking responsibility. In that moment of irrationality, I entertained the idea of indulgence. Maybe I should just work harder, earn more, and keep him for myself. After all, he was the man I'd loved for so many years. I saved his number, then threw myself into work with renewed determination, flying to 3 cities in 1 week. It was exhausting, but I barely had time to think about him. When I returned, there was another meeting with a project partner. This time, Mike booked a room at a different hotel under the same chain as the Opal District. After a long evening of drinking, I stumbled back to my room but assured Mike I could manage on my own. I let him rest while I headed upstairs. Barely minutes after I collapsed onto the bed, there was a knock at the door. "Who is it?" I called, leaning against the frame. From outside came a cold, familiar voice, "Room service." Half sober now, I opened the door, only to be greeted by Andre's icy expression. His presence knocked the air out of my lungs. So, I had been naive after all. A single night with me wouldn't make a dent in his earnings. He clearly didn't need me to take responsibility. This must be the same flirtatious routine he used with every client. His network must be vast, I thought bitterly. All the major hotels seemed to know him. And yet, I had foolishly believed there was something special between us. In that instant, a wave of cold detachment washed over me. I spoke slowly, keeping my voice steady. "No service needed. Thank you." I slammed the door with all my strength, not bothering to think about the expression on his face. Then, alone on the bed, I cried for what felt like hours. To have my feelings crushed by the same man twice, it was unbearable. I'd wasted years on him, and it took me days to pull myself together. Back home, I stayed in a self-imposed exile until Mike's relentless calls finally got through. "Oh my God, Miss Swan, you're alive. What have you been doing? There's a major project that needs your attention. Dinner tonight at Crescent Restaurant on 45th Street. Don't be late. Money talks. After all, what good is moping when wealth can buy any man I want?" I rallied myself, took a long shower, and slipped into a sleek, tailored suit. A flawless makeup look later, I was ready to tackle the world again. The meeting was with Scarlett, a self-made businesswoman like me. I figured we'd have plenty in common. But the moment I walked in, my gaze landed on Andres seated next to Scarlett. My chest tightened. Of course. His connections were impressive, he didn't need someone like me. I forced myself to look away, regaining composure before greeting everyone and taking my seat. I dove into work, staying professional and focused. At one point, Andres poured me a glass of wine. I didn't refuse, mindful of decorum, but I avoided looking at him for the rest of the evening. There was no need for further misunderstandings. After the dinner concluded, Scarlett unexpectedly asked Andres to escort me. He obediently rose, buttoned his suit, and stepped forward to steady me by the arm. Refusing Scarlett's kindness seemed ungracious. So I let Andres guide me out of the restaurant. The cool night air cleared my head. I stopped at the curb and said, with deliberate distance, "This is far enough. Thank you. I'll take a cab back to the hotel myself." Without a word, Andres ignored my protest, ushering me into a sleek luxury car. Clearly, Scarlett treated him well. In the car, he loosened the top 2 buttons of his shirt, his expression dark and irritable. "You can be as heartless as you want, but I can't just leave you like this. Relax, I'm only taking you to your hotel. Right. And after dropping me off, he'd go right back to Scarlett, wouldn't he?" The stifling emotion clawed at my throat, and my eyes burned. Who was truly heartless here? He demanded I take responsibility, yet he could entertain other women without hesitation. Back in college, he led me around in circles, and now I was still the fool dancing to his tune. Overwhelmed by frustration and alcohol, I broke down, tears streaming uncontrollably. "Stop the car." Andre stared at me in disbelief, his eyes flickering with confusion. "Why are you crying?" I broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as all my pent-up grievances exploded out of me. Honestly, I didn't even know why I was crying anymore. When I reached for the door handle to fling it open and escape, Andres pulled me into his arms, holding me there firmly. "Do you always go this crazy after drinking?" Yes, my drinking habits were terrible, but tonight's outburst was entirely his fault. He sighed in exasperation. "From now on, no more drinking." "Who do you think you are to tell me what to do?" I lashed out at him, scratching, biting, hitting, venting every ounce of frustration I'd harbored for years. Between punches, I shouted at him. "Back then, you couldn't stand me, a spoiled brat spending her family's money. You wouldn't even look at me. And now, I've made my own way, earned my own money, and you still look down on me. What makes you so great? You're nothing more than a kept man. I don't like you anymore. You're an asshole." I didn't know how long I went on, or how many insults I hurled. What surprised me most was that he never talked back, never retaliated. In the end, he didn't dump me on the side of the road. Instead, he drove me back to my hotel and saw me safely inside. The next morning, I woke up fully clothed, with no sign of Andres. The other side of the bed was cold. He had probably gone back to Scarlet last night. A dull ache lingered in my chest, but I resolved to leave Andres behind. It was time to move on and stop letting him haunt me. On the nightstand was a note, written in his familiar, graceful handwriting. I'd once collected countless scraps of paper filled with this beautiful script. Now, he was using it to maintain what he called a client relationship, reminding me to call him. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash, deleting his number from my phone for good measure. What I didn't expect was how often I'd still run into him. Scarlett clearly liked having him around every time we met. Andres was by her side. At the subsequent business dinners, he always sat next to me. Perhaps Scarlett had instructed him to do so. He kept blocking drinks on my behalf. I put up with it for the sake of sealing the deal. By the time the contract was signed, I'd had enough. On the last day, Andres' expression was dark and unreadable. His gaze heavy with something I couldn't quite place. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked, his voice low. I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Why on earth would I call him? Then it hit me, he was probably upset I hadn't paid him for taking me back to the hotel last time. I pulled out my checkbook and stuffed a blank check into his suit pocket. "Write whatever amount you think I owe you. Let's call it even." Through the slowly rising car window, his burning gaze seemed to consume me. Those deep, expressive eyes held an emotion I couldn't decipher, mixed with an undeniable fury. In the car, tears silently streaked down my face. I wanted to post something on Instagram but stopped myself, feeling it would only add to my humiliation. Instead, I pulled out the photo of the young guy Amy had introduced me to earlier. With a bitter smile, I captioned it, "The people you love at 22 won't always stay in your heart, but you'll always love people who are 22. Not long after, Amy texted me the location of a bar. No need to guess, the boy in the photo would be there tonight. Hoping for a change of pace and mood, I headed out to Manhattan that evening to meet up. Amy, as always, didn't disappoint. The bar was lively, and there wasn't just one charming young guy, there were several. Each one was warm, attentive, and undeniably good-looking, with toned bodies and bright smiles. Amy wrapped an arm around me, whispering comfortingly, "Cheer up, babe. Pick any 22-year-old hottie you like." I wasn't shy about it either. I chose two. One fed me fruit, while the other kept calling me baby sister as he poured me drinks. Then, suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. It felt like someone was watching me. I turned to follow the piercing gaze and froze. Across the bar, in a shadowy booth, sat a man who stood out like a stark, silent monument in the middle of the noisy chaos. Andres had always drawn attention wherever he went, and tonight was no different. I told myself it was just a coincidence. I had no intention of acknowledging him. From time to time, women approached his table, one after another. But they all left, disappointed and empty-handed. Amy noticed him too and leaned in, whispering in my ear. "Wow, Andres is still so damn handsome, better than ever. No wonder you can't get over him. Do you think he's here for you?" "For me? Impossible," I scoffed, though my voice wavered slightly. "There's no way. Andres and I were done. We had no unfinished business, no lingering ties. Nothing. Or so I kept telling myself." On the dance floor, I was surrounded by a group of charming, sweet-talking young men, feeling as carefree and joyful as ever. Who needed someone like Andres, that emotionless tree stump, when there were these handsome, playful guys who actually knew how to have fun? After a while, I stumbled off to the restroom. Once inside, I pulled out my lipstick, ready to touch up my makeup. Just as I uncapped it, the door to my stall was abruptly pushed open. Startled, I didn't even have time to react before a tall, familiar figure stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Andres. The cramped space amplified his overpowering presence. My heart jumped, and my lipstick hand slipped, smudging a line across my cheek. I froze, too shocked to speak. He cornered me, his voice low and intense. "The person you loved at 22 doesn't matter anymore? Now you're into young men who are 22. His words were biting, but the pain in his tone was impossible to miss. "Victoria, you've won." Wait, what? That phrase sounded suspiciously familiar. Isn't that exactly what I had posted on Instagram? How did he know? And what did he mean by "I've won"? Before I could piece it together, he leaned in, his voice raw with suppressed emotion. "When you love someone from the start, you're supposed to keep loving them. What kind of person flits from one to another so easily?" His words struck a nerve, but not for the reasons he thought. Flitting from one person to another? Abandoning someone? He wasn't seriously talking about me, was he? Let's get one thing straight, he was the one cozying up to rich women. Not me. He was the one who'd made me feel like a fool for even considering we had a chance. And now he was here, acting like the victim, throwing accusations while pretending to be heartbroken? I wasn't going to entertain his nonsense. Fury surged through me as I shot up and rammed my head into his chin with all my might. "Tough luck for you." The impact startled him, and I seized the moment to bolt. But I barely made it a step before his hand shot out, pulling me back effortlessly. He pressed me against the wall, his lips crashing onto mine in a storm of frustration and passion. Around us, the muffled laughter and chatter of other girls in the restroom reminded me where we were. A public restroom in a bar. This kind of thing wasn't uncommon, but that didn't make it any less mortifying. I broke free, my anger boiling over, and slapped him hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed in the small stall, cutting through the sounds of the bar. He stared at me, his cheek reddening, but the intensity in his eyes didn't waver. If anything, it burned brighter. The face I had once cherished, made my phone's wallpaper, and clung to during countless sleepless nights, was still absurdly handsome. I stormed out, seething, the metallic tang of blood lingering in my mouth. I wasn't sure if it was mine or his. After that chaotic encounter, I lost all interest in continuing the night. I said goodbye to Amy and headed straight home. The next morning, I booked a flight to visit my hometown, hoping to clear my head. As soon as I got home, my parents wasted no time. Now that they were comfortably retired and financially free, their favorite pastime was pressuring me to settle down and have kids. As their only child, I was their sole target for this relentless campaign. "You're not getting any younger," they began, right on cue. "It's time to think about giving us a grandchild. We're bored." This time was no exception. They had already arranged a blind date for me with someone they said had a similar family background. Apparently, our families had been friends for years, and we had even played together as kids. I reluctantly agreed to meet him. Honestly, after my recent heartbreak, I was starting to entertain the idea of just giving up on love and following my parents' wishes. If he met my standards and seemed like a decent match, why not give it a shot? The coffee shop was cozy, the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. I spotted him sitting by the window, his profile sharp and refined. He wore a tailored suit and rimless glasses, exuding a scholarly elegance that was hard to ignore. I blinked in surprise. The chubby little boy I vaguely remembered had transformed into a strikingly handsome man. With practiced ease, I greeted him. "Daniel. You've changed so much. If my mom hadn't shown me your picture beforehand, I wouldn't have recognized you." He stood to greet me, his demeanor calm and composed, as if he had expected this. "You've changed too, you're even more beautiful than your photo." Our conversation flowed naturally, a pleasant surprise. As it turned out, he was also grappling with relentless pressure from his family to settle down. By the end of the meeting, we had reached a mutually beneficial agreement: we'd pretend to date, at least for now, to appease our parents. That same day, we took a picture together and posted it on social media with a relationship announcement. Within seconds, the post received its first like. Usually, Amy would be the one to immediately like my posts, her nosy nature impossible to suppress. But when I checked, it wasn't her. Instead, it was from an account with a black, featureless profile picture and a single dot as its username. I frowned. My account had a lot of business contacts, and I didn't recognize all of them offhand. Curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked on the profile. To my surprise, there was no name. No profile details, just a blank page. What struck me even more was that the account had no remark or tag. I always added notes for my contacts, yet this one was unmarked. Confused, I clicked again, only to find that I had been blocked. Blocked. An unshakable hunch formed in my mind, but I quickly pushed it aside. It couldn't be him. Could it? Just moments ago, this person liked my post, and now they'd blocked me? I have a habit of digging into things that don't sit right, so I carefully reviewed my friend request history. Turns out, this account was added about 2 weeks ago. I couldn't recall anything about it, but when I checked their Facebook profile, the cover photo caught my eye. It was the night view outside the Opal District Hotel. Maybe they're a staff member there? Or perhaps I drunkenly added a stranger during one of my late-night escapades? Daniel's car pulled up to pick me up, and I decided not to dwell on the mystery of a random stranger adding and then blocking me. As long as they weren't a business partner, it didn't matter. By the time I checked my social media again, my post had racked up dozens of likes. Amy, as usual, chimed in with her sharp tongue, suggesting I bring Daniel to dinner sometime. With Daniel acting as my shield, the pressure from my parents eased considerably. After taking him on a quick tour around the area, I returned to Manhattan. As it happened, Daniel also needed to head to Manhattan for business, so we shared the ride. During the drive, Daniel started adding some business contacts to his phone. Out of boredom, I glanced at his screen and froze when I saw a familiar black profile picture with the username set as a single dot. My stomach churned. Was this person really one of his business contacts? Why would they block me, though? It made no sense. Curiosity got the better of me. "Who's that from?" I asked casually. Daniel, still focused on his phone, sent the contact a quick message to confirm their meeting time, before replying, "Someone from Spencer Group. They own the Opal District Hotel chain. Their business portfolio is massive. Apparently, the person we're meeting is their heir." My confusion deepened. Spencer Group? The Opal District? I racked my brain but couldn't remember when I might have added someone so significant. And to top it off, they had blocked me out of nowhere. The absurdity of it all left me speechless. Losing the chance to connect with someone of that stature, it felt like such a wasted opportunity. But given that he'd /s currently working with Daniel's family, I didn't feel comfortable adding him on social media. It looked like I was trying to steal business. The next few days passed in a blur. Daniel was caught up with work, and I was busy with company matters. Then, one day, Daniel called me. "Victoria, that Spencer guy is impossible to handle. There's a cocktail party tonight, and I'm short a +1. Can you come help me out?" I had a dinner engagement that evening, but I could cancel it, so I agreed to go. That night, Daniel picked me up, and when he saw me in my black mermaid evening gown, looking like a black swan, He was momentarily stunned. Victoria, you've really changed. I climbed into the car, smiling and teasing, how have I changed? Once he was in the car, his expression softened as he replied, you've matured. You look even more beautiful than before. I knew that look, he wasn't just talking about appearances. In that moment, I saw the spark of something more in his eyes. We had agreed this was just a favor, helping each other out, but now, I wasn't so sure. Trying to push aside the sudden unease, I avoided his gaze. When we arrived at the venue, the Opal District, I was surprised to see so many influential people there. Daniel introduced me to a few familiar faces, and I effortlessly played along, navigating the social scene with ease. Then, after a few minutes, Daniel's gaze sharpened as he said, Mr. Spencer has arrived. I looked up, but only caught a glimpse of a tall, commanding figure weaving through the crowd, his face hidden from view. I shrugged casually. You go ahead. I'll stop by the restroom first. After I freshened up and touched up my makeup in front of the mirror, I reminded myself that I was here to help Daniel. After all, we were friends. And helping him out was the least I could do. As I was applying lipstick, a figure dressed in elegant black appeared in the mirror. That face, one I would never forget. Andres. His business skills were undoubtedly impressive. I wondered which rich woman he was accompanying tonight. I had no intention of acknowledging him, and he didn't stop me either. We simply brushed past each other without a word. At the second cocktail party after the first one, I nearly lost control of my expression when I saw Andres seated at the head of the table. Today's event was a gathering for the heir of Spencer Group, and he was there. His business acumen was impressive. How did he manage to expand so quickly? He was staring at me too, his expression dark and complicated. I rolled my eyes, trying to ignore him. As I settled into my seat, Daniel stood and raised his glass. Mr. Spencer, thank you for the invitation. Allow me to offer a toast. What? Daniel knew him? I looked up, puzzled, and saw Andres give me a faint, unreadable smile, before lifting his own glass. The others in the room remained still, but Andres, only he had the Spencer name. Andres. Mr. Spencer. The heir to Spencer Group? My mind went blank. How could someone who came from a humble background, who worked 2 part-time jobs just to make ends meet in college, possibly be the heir to Spencer Group? I couldn't focus on their conversation anymore, everything became a blur. But I did hear Andres say something, looking directly at me. Daniel. Your girlfriend is beautiful and very capable. His words felt like a slap. There was no way he was genuinely complimenting me, he must have been mocking me. I remembered the graduation party, how I had arrogantly offered to pay him for one night, and how he had coldly told me to get lost. The embarrassment still haunted me. And then there was our reunion, the misunderstanding where I thought he was a male escort. All of it felt like slaps in the face now. I wanted to disappear under the table, to escape from the crushing embarrassment. But alongside the embarrassment, there was fury from being deceived, from being toyed with. I had pined for him for years, collected thousands of photos of him, scrap paper filled with his scribbles, even straws had used. And in the end, it was all a waste of time. I didn't even know who he really was. I hadn't understood anything about him. Who he was now didn't matter to me. He wasn't the person I had imagined. We weren't meant for each other. Even if there had been misunderstandings, it didn't change the fact that we were strangers now. After tonight, we'd probably never see each other again. And then there was Daniel, who'd been drowned in alcohol. I realized then that it was probably my fault. He was being forced into this situation because of me, getting drunk and manipulated. As expected, Andres coldly glared at me and signaled to his secretary to line up a row of drinks in front of me. I heard Daniel /S girlfriend can hold her liquor, he said, his tone laced with mockery. If you manage to drink all these and still walk out of this hotel, I/LL sign the contract. This small humiliation? It didn't faze me. I picked up the glass and downed it in one go. After all, who hasn't been pushed around in the business world? Daniel had gotten into this mess because of me, so I figured I owed him one. I finished all the drinks, but Andras' face was as dark as a storm cloud, his anger almost radiating off of him. Victoria, is this really about your childhood friend, your boyfriend? I rummaged through Daniel's bag, grabbed the contract, and slapped it down on the table in front of Andres. Stop talking. Sign it. You promised me. To my surprise, under the stunned gazes of everyone around, Andres actually took out a pen and signed the document. I turned and walked out of the room, instructing Daniel's assistant to take him back. I could hardly move him on my own. But as soon as I stepped outside, I couldn't stand. The world spun around me, and the breeze only made things worse. Suddenly, I felt my body lift off the ground, and before I knew it, I was being carried. The figure holding me was blurry, and I couldn't make out their face. I was thrown onto a hotel bed, the same suite I had stayed in with Andres 2 nights before. Was I hearing things? It seemed like Andres was speaking, his voice angry and biting, but the words that came out were soft, almost gentle. Victoria, how can you just stop liking someone you've loved for so long? I admit defeat. Even if you're just toying with me, I accept it. Victoria, you're not allowed to love anyone else. Look at me. After that, I lost track of everything. It was as if I had gone blank, another night I couldn't remember. I had long since lost the ability to recall what was said or done. I woke up the next morning to find Andres beside me. And I was frozen in shock. He knew full well I was Daniel's girlfriend, but still, without hesitation, he climbed into my bed. Even though Daniel and I were only pretending to be a couple, his behavior, taking advantage of the situation like that, was just so manipulative. Furious, I threw $200 on the table and stormed out, making sure to humiliate him as much as I could. Then, I fled to another city. Before, I could afford to ignore responsibility, thinking Andres was still the same person I knew back in college, not the heir of Spencer Group he had become. But now, getting involved with him meant entangling myself in a mess I wasn't prepared for. I retreated. The result? Andres went on a wild hunt for me. Through Amy's intel, I learned that Andres had gone crazy trying to find me, even reaching out to my parents. Now that everyone knew he was the heir to Spencer Group, my friends in the group chat were buzzing about the glorious 4 years I had spent shamelessly pursuing him. They also loved to remind me of the humiliating moment when I had thought he was a male escort. They said Andres hated me. That he would stop at nothing to find me and take revenge. I was terrified, hiding in my house, afraid to leave. Then one day, Amy came to visit. There was a knock at the door, and when I opened it, I saw Andres standing there. The man I had once loved more than anything had now turned into a nightmare. I panicked and tried to slam the door shut, but his long legs had already stepped in. In that moment, I thought about falling to my knees and begging him to forgive me, hoping he would show mercy. Out of nowhere, Andres suddenly pulled me into a crushing embrace. Holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. Was he here to take revenge? It seemed like Amy must have told him where I was. My mind scrambled for words, trying to come up with an explanation. Then, I heard Andres' trembling, hoarse voice in my ear, Victoria, you can do whatever you want, just stop running from me. What? Was Andres begging me? This was nothing like the revenge I had imagined, and I wasn't prepared for it at all. I stood there, frozen in place. When I didn't respond, he started to lose control, his voice cracking as he pleaded, break up with Daniel. Be with me. I don't care about anything you've done to me. Let's start over. Was I hearing this right? Andres, was he really asking me to be with him? No, wait. What had I even done to him? The only thing was the misunderstanding about him being a male escort. He had tricked me. I suppressed my anger, trying to calm him down first. I need some time to think about it. I'll give you an answer when I'm ready. Andres looked at me with such raw, unfiltered emotion. Without a moment's hesitation, he rejected my words. You're trying to trick me again, trying to run away. Oh. So he saw through me. But why did he look so defeated? He had always been so immaculate and composed. Now, his jaw was covered in stubble, and his eyes were bloodshot. My memory of him was of a confident, sharp man from college. I'd never seen him like this before. He gripped my shoulders, looking at me for what felt like an eternity, before finally conceding in a voice filled with defeat, "Fine. I'll wait. Come find me when you've made up your mind." And with that, he left. His figure, hunched and desolate, made my heart ache. I didn't understand, why was he doing this? He had rejected me, humiliated me, and now he was asking for my love? I came to confront Amy, but what she told me about Andres and me left me speechless. I had no idea about the things she revealed. I opened the long-forgotten social media account, the one I used to check obsessively, and found all of Andres' accounts, the ones I had spent countless hours scrolling through back then. On the night of our graduation party, he had posted something on one of his social media accounts. The image was of a red rose. I'll probably never get the chance to say this out loud. Amy once told me that night. As I was making wild declarations to Andres, he had been holding that very red rose, hiding it behind his back. He had been planning to confess to me, but my reckless words had ruined everything. Back in high school, Andres' mother had an affair, and after their divorce, his father fell into a deep depression that he couldn't climb out of. It was during that time that Andres started working part-time, building up the strength to support his family bit by bit. The reason he worked at his family's amusement park and hotel wasn't because they were poor, it was because he was forced to grow up too soon. And that was when I entered his life. Because of his family's situation, he had been too afraid to respond to my feelings. Still, he appeared in front of me time and time again. In the library, he would leave notebooks filled with notes, buy 2 drinks, and always position himself in front of the camera when I was taking pictures. Going through the camera roll that had captured 4 years of his youth, I realized he had known all along. But neither of us had the courage to act on it. For 4 years, I never confessed, and he never took that step either. It wasn't until that night at the graduation party, when he finally found the courage to speak up, that I made that reckless decision to say what I did. How disappointed he must have been. He probably thought I was just like all the other women who used their wealth to toy with people. And so, he crushed the rose in his hands and told me to get lost, furious and heartbroken. But later, after drinking, he regretted it. He picked up the broken pieces of the rose, one by one, all alone in his regret. My vision blurred as I searched for that black profile, clicked to add him as a friend. He accepted the request quickly. I choked back tears and sent a single message. "I want to see you." There was no response from him, but a minute later, there was a knock at the door. I stood up to open it, and when I saw Andres standing there, I rushed into his arms. I've always believed in finishing what I started, and today, I was finally giving closure to the years of unspoken love. If only I had been brave enough back then, when he was standing in front of the camera, to step forward and not run away. Maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't have missed each other all these years. Later, I learned from Andres that he had never stopped following my updates. While I was working hard, he was doing the same, fighting through a much tougher path. He had faced so many challenges in his younger years, and during the hardest times, it was my social media photos that kept him going. And then, that day, when I was drunk and ran into him at the hotel, brushing past each other. He had brought honey water and knocked on my door, but I had blocked his way. That night, he looked out the window, practically bursting with joy, wanting to announce to the world just how happy he was. And the next morning, I woke up and mistook him for an escort, leaving a check behind without a word. He must have been furious. And over time, he would come to me at night to make me pay for what had happened. But despite everything, he came back for me a second time, afraid that if he didn't act now, he might never get another chance. The next day, he left his number. I really did think about giving it a try, and I didn't even mind his unusual job. Who would have known that all the misunderstandings over the years had been so stupid? Miss Scarlett wasn't his lover, she was his sister. And many of the clients I worked with over the years had actually been introduced by him. With each misunderstanding, I had unintentionally hurt him over and over again. Now that the misunderstandings were cleared, I was both heartbroken and angry. Was I really too cowardly, too slow to speak up? How many times had I been silently swept along by him without saying a word? And then, when I announced my relationship with Daniel, he had actually considered walking away. Somehow, after all that, Andres found the strength to lower his pride and come back to me, pleading for my love. I traced the lines of his face with my fingers, the face that had stolen my heart so many times. I couldn't help but fall deeper, uncontrollably. Honestly, it wasn't bad to love the person you've liked since university, and keep loving them. I've always believed in having a beginning and an end. In the type to stick with something, and loving one person for a lifetime would be one of the proudest things I'd ever do. At the engagement party, Andres and Daniel shook hands, their gazes locking with unspoken tension. Daniel couldn't take it anymore and surrendered, saying, "It's all a misunderstanding. Victoria and I have nothing going on. We've just been dealing with our parents." Andres, being sensitive when it came to me, had never let go of our public announcement with Daniel. He was constantly making me show off our love on every social platform. This journey, which started with a one-sided crush, had finally turned into a mutual pursuit. We had both waited until the other was ready to declare our love to the world. If you're going to have a crush on someone, then be bold. Don't be a coward in love. And,